What if I told you that Andor's Rix Road arc is a masterpiece, not just for the story, but for the hidden details that creator Tony Gilroy carefully put into these final 2 episodes? For instance, this recurring theme of sleeping and the rebels being asleep while the Empire grabbed power.
The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep.
And how that man who bangs his metal drum every morning is the literal and symbolic wake-up call for the rebellion. These touches are deliberately placed by the filmmakers, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you notice them, you can't help but wonder, why? What are the filmmakers trying to say with these touches? There's many details present in the Rix Road arc that really unifies what Andor Season 1 is trying to say. To show you what I mean, let's go back to episode 12. Rix Road. In this episode, Andor has a flashback to his father Clem talking about old rusted metal units and how people just buy new ones at 10 times the price without cleaning old rusty ones up.
500 credits each. People don't look down the way they should. They don't look down, they don't look past the rust.
In the same episode, when Marva gives her speech to Ferrix, she says,
There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us.
Marva then reminds the people of Ferrix of how asleep they've been to the Empire's overreach, how little they've done to fight back, and when you think of the Empire as a spreading rust across the galaxy, it puts the orange, red, and yellow colors of Ferrix citizens in another light. I originally likened these colors to fire, saying that the people of Ferrix, and rebels in general, represent a fire that spreads across the galaxy, and I stand by that. But I also think these colors could represent rust, too. Rust typically presents in red, orange, and yellow colors, but it can also present in browns, greens, and blacks. The people of Ferrix also sport greens and browns, and it makes me think of the people of Ferrix who have been asleep to the tyranny of the Empire as rusted. It's interesting they used rust as a symbol here. The people of Ferrix are metal workers. They bang on metal to warn the town of Empire presence, work with old metal parts every day, and have a huge metal scrapyard. This theme of the Empire being like rust and its impact on the people of Ferrix makes complete sense given their metal working culture. Clem says that most people don't look past the rust, and that he doesn't understand it. Multiple times in Season 1, Cassian talks about how much the Empire doesn't care about the rebels. In Episode 3, Andor talks about how easy it is to steal from the Empire, saying,
You just walk in like you belong. They're so proud of themselves, they don't even care. They're so fat and satisfied, they can't imagine it that someone like me would ever get inside their house, walk their floors, spit in their food, take their gear.
Then Luthen follows it up with,
The arrogance is remarkable, isn't it? They don't even think about us.
In Episode 9, Cassian tells Kino Loy that the Empire isn't listening to them because they don't care enough to listen.
Nobody's listening! Nobody's listening!
It kind of connects back to what Clem says here. He says that people don't look down to where they should. They don't look down. They don't look past the rust. Throughout my analysis of Andor's first season, I've talked about a motif of climbing that shows up time and time again. I've also talked about how the Empire is constantly shown in positions of height, especially in the Aldhani and Narkina 5 arcs, signifying their power. My interpretation of Clem's words to Andor are that most people, meaning the Empire, don't look down, don't look past the rust, meaning the people under the boot of the Empire, people like those on Ferrix. Clem also tells Cassian,
Here's the thing, Cassian. The man that sees everything is more blessed than cursed.
The Empire is blinded by their own arrogance. They don't even think about their own subjects because of how powerful they are. They don't look past the rust. This motif of seeing everything kind of reminds me of the Eye of Aldhani. Why did the Andor creators call it that? I've already established in previous videos that the Eye is a metaphor for the beautiful burning chaos of the rebels. Well, analyzing the second new theme of these final episodes shines a light on things, and that's one of sleeping. In episode 12, Marva says that,
But I fear for you. We've been sleeping.
She also says,
The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep.
Perhaps the Eye of Aldani connects back to what Marva says here. When we wake up, what happens? Our eyes open. Could the eye be representing the galaxy waking up to the tyranny of the Empire, given that the Aldani raid was the rebels' announcement to the galaxy? I think so. Marva's words make even more sense when you consider Andor's first arc. It begins on Preox Morlana in the dead of night with Andor looking for his sister. He's then forced to kill 2 Pre-Mor soldiers, which sparks a manhunt for him and sets the rebellion in motion. We then go back to Ferrix and watch the sun rise as we get introduced to its characters. Episode 2 takes place at night as the search for Andor intensifies, and then in Episode 3, the sun rises on Ferrix as the first rebel activity happens there in years. One of my favorite shots in Episode 3 is when Cassian remembers Marva climbing into the atmosphere of Kenari, and he feels the sun on his face. It's mirrored by a shot of modern-day Cassian seeing the sun on the horizon as Luthen takes him away. I think the sun ties heavily into this sleeping theme. When you wake up, the sun is typically already up or in the process of going up. The dark night leaves, and the bright sun takes its place. It's here we arrive at a third new motif in this comprehensive Andor analysis, and that's one of the sun and moon. We've already talked about climbing being a common theme in Andor, and what exactly does the sun do? It rises into the sky, climbing until midday, where it descends again over the horizon. There's a throwaway line in Episode 12 where Empire officials tell Dedra,
"What time is the funeral?"
Well, they asked for midday. We pushed it back 2 hours.
It's funny because the sun is at its highest point in the sky at midday, and as an aside, there's many times in this final episode where the rebels are actually framed as higher than the Empire. Like when the Time Grappler, as he's called on StarWars.fandom.com, rings the bell with his anvils from the tall tower. If you remember, the Empire sends a stormtrooper up to shut him down, but he kicks the stormtrooper off the roof. There's also a scene where Dedra and Captain Tigo crawl on the ground in the chaos of the Ferrix uprising. Then we have Marva's hologram, which everyone in Ferrix, including the Empire, looks up to since it's projected into the sky. Then we have Marva saying stuff like,
I always wanted to be lifted. I was always eager, always waiting to be inspired. I remember every time it happened, every time the dead lifted me.
All of these touches connect with this motif of lifting, climbing, and rising, like the sun, and how the rebels gain more and more power over the course of Season 1. And, as if we needed another example of Andor's climbing motif, Episode 11 starts with Cassian and Melshi clinging to a cliff. I mentioned this motif of the sun and moon. To better explain it, let me introduce another theme present in Andor, which is that of cycles. The final 2 episodes of Andor Season 1 are like the perfect closing of a loop. We begin on Ferrix in episodes 1 through 3, and we end on Ferrix in episodes 11 through 12. Luthen comes to Ferrix in episode 3, and he comes back in episode 12. The Empire's searching for Andor in episodes 1 through 3, and they're searching for him again in episodes 11 through 12, baiting him with his own mother's funeral. It's a cycle, or a circle. Like I said in previous videos, the architecture of the rebels, especially on Ferrix, is more circular and round, while that of the Empire is more rigid and angular. I especially love these arcs that we see on Ferrix everywhere. Tell me, what shape is the sun? Obviously a circle, like the circular designs we see on Ferrix. Also, what shape does the trajectory of the sun take in the sky? It rises in the east and sets in the west, arcing across the sky, like the arcs we see on Ferrix. If you imagine the cycle of a single day, the sun rises and sets, then the moon rises and sets, almost as if they're rotating on one big circular track, repeating endlessly. There's a really good shot in episode 11 of B's eye as he learns that Marva has died. Something about this bright red and orange circle really stood out to me, and it reminded me of a sun. It makes sense from a color perspective too. The sun produces lots of reds, oranges, and yellows in the sky as it rises and sets, and the colorless, black and white nature of the moon and night fit the Empire's color schemes perfectly as well. Also, I've discussed in past analysis that the rebels are associated with warmth and heat, while the Empire is associated with coldness and sterility. I used to work in a lawn mowing truck in college, and my superiors always told me the day is hottest when the sun is highest in the sky, at midday. It makes the people of Ferrix requesting a midday funeral make even more sense when you think of it in that regard. One last thing here. Remember what Luthen says in his epic Episode 10 monologue?
I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I burned my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
In these words, written by Andor creators, the rebellion is directly compared to a sunrise. There's actually another wrinkle to this theme as well that I find interesting. In my Aldani analysis, I talked about how the rebels are represented in nature and colors you'd see in nature, while the Empire is represented as more synthetic and unnatural. I also talked about how that ties into something Nemik said in his manifesto.
And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural.
In my Aldani analysis, I talked at length about how the repetitive nature of the Eye of Aldani and how it happens once every 3 years might have been a message from Tony Gilroy about the cyclical nature of tyranny and freedom. It's a cycle. When tyranny rears its head, rebellion naturally occurs. Nemik says in his manifesto,
Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
When you think of the circular nature of Andor's first season, the circular architecture of Ferrix, the circular shape of the sun, and the circular nature of the sun and moon dancing across the sky, it connects with this idea too much to be random. And when you consider the overarching story of Star Wars across all 3 trilogies, it's basically a cycle of tyranny and rebellion that repeats over and over again. And then we have this famous line from George Lucas.
Again, it's like poetry, sort of they rhyme.
In episode 11, there's a scene where Mon and Vel watch Leda reciting old Chandrillan chants. I'll recite it for you now because it's fascinating. Yielding in acceptance, safe in the braid of the old ways, true and steady and braided in trust. The old ways hold us, safe in the knot, in the binding. The old ways teach us, tethered in permanence. In the Aldani arc, Vel says that everyone has their own rebellion, and Leda, like many adolescents, rebels against the ideals of her mother by accepting old conservative Chandrillan customs so fiercely. It relates to what we're seeing in the United States right now. It seems that more and more young people are skewing conservative lately. Many studies over the last few years have proven this. My wife talks to me about how the tradwife trend has recently gone viral on TikTok, showing, like we see with Leda in this show, a preference for more traditional gender roles among the youth. Mon also says that old Chandrillan customs are somehow stronger here on Coruscant than back at home, which makes sense since Coruscant is the seat of the Empire's power in the universe, and the Empire values things like rules, tradition, and order, aka a more conservative way of living. If you've seen Season 2, and a quick spoiler alert for the next 10 seconds, Leda breaks down and cries before her wedding, talking about how her future husband won't even hold her hand. And this shows an important evolution of what we're talking about here. If we don't truly understand our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And that brings us to another theme I've discussed ad nauseum in my past analysis, which is one of history and the battle between old and new. In the Aldani arc, Nemik shows Andor an old navigational unit and talks about how folks have gotten too reliant on new technology from the Empire and forgotten how to use old things. Nemik says that,
We've grown reliant on Imperial tech and we've made ourselves vulnerable. There's a growing list of things we've known and forgotten, things they've pushed us to forget. Things like freedom.
it seems the Empire wants people to forget their history. They want to give people new things and technology so they become reliant on it, forget their history, and have their freedom taken from them. Davos Skalden talks about conservative values in episode 10, and how
boundaries can be liberating.
I got this really great comment from John Tate last week where he talked about the concept of freedom being relative. Freedom for who? He asks. Freedom means different things for different people. Some find freedom in restriction, rules, and boundaries, like the tradwife trend we see on TikTok. Others, like Nemik and Luthen, see freedom in terms of being able to make the choices you want without much restriction. It's ironic because you can choose to live by more conservative values, like Leda does, but after you make that choice to live by those rules, you might find yourself living in a tighter box than you hoped. It's the same thing that happens with the local Dani tribes on Aldani. In the past, thousands of Donnies would make the trip to their sacred altar to watch the Eye of Eldani, and now only a handful make it because of rest stops the Empire places along their multi-day trek to distract them. There's two moments in these final two episodes of Season 1 that connect back to this theme of remembering your history. One is when Andor visits his father's stone and remembers a lesson he taught him about cleaning old, unwanted units and seeing possibilities where others only see rust. It's a true message of liberation and freedom. Andor is remembering the history of his people, specifically his dad, in this moment. Marva, in her speech from Beyond the Grave, says,
I was 6, I think. First time I touched a funerary stone. Heard our music. Felt our history.
As previously covered, she also talks about the dead lifting the living, inspiring them with their memory and truth. Marva is literally history now, considering she's dead, and she's sharing her wisdom with the people of Ferrix in this scene. And it's her truth, her memory, that sparks this uprising we see in the rest of the episode. It's just perfect writing. And what does the Empire try to do? They try to cover her up and silence her by placing a cloak over her hologram. This is exactly what the Empire tries to do in general. They try to get people to forget they have a choice. They try to wipe away the wisdom and truth embedded in the cultures they enslave. I find the Ferrix custom of stoning or mixing the ashes of their dead with bricks and placing them in the structures of their towns as a perfect antithesis to the Empire. The people of Ferrix don't forget their history. They honor their dead and the wisdom of the past, and it guides them, like Nemik's old navigational unit, to take the correct path. It makes what Luthen says in his monologue even more powerful.
I share my dreams with ghosts.
Speaking of dreams and this motif of waking up, the Time Grappler, as he's called, bangs on an anvil every morning to do what? To wake the citizens of Ferrix up, like a church bell or an alarm clock. Speaking of sound, let's talk about the music of Ferrix. In episode 12, we get treated to beautiful music from the musicians of Ferrix, who play on metal instruments, by the way, which ties directly into their culture of metalworking. I mean, even this drum is metal. Music shows up in other areas, most notably in the opening credits of every episode of Andor, which features different musical instruments playing the same theme. In one respect, I think music is a clever analogy for what the rebels are doing. They're coming together, each contributing to the symphony of rebellion and raising their voices in unison. Nemik says in his manifesto,
Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward.
One message that Andor seems to be sending is that rebellion is a symphony where everybody has a part to play. Andor seems to be using music to show that rebellion is an open invitation to everyone. Anyone can enlist in the cause. But there's also a different meaning to this musical theme, and I think something that Marva says in her speech shines a light on what that is. She says, I was 6, I think, first time I touched a funerary stone, heard our music, felt our history. There's a moment where Bix leans her head out the window to listen to the band playing, and she sheds a tear while doing so. She's remembering. It's striking, because in the rest of the episode, she seems to have little idea who she is or where she's at. But in this moment, while listening to the band, she's home. This moment was very moving for me, and shows the power of music for connecting us back to our roots. How many times have you heard a song that takes you back in time to a particular moment? That's the magic of music. It imbues feeling and memory naturally to the listener, and that's precisely what Marva's talking about in her speech. She says she was 6 when she first heard the music of Ferrix and felt her history. It reminds me of a moment in Season 2 where, major spoiler alert for the next 10 seconds, the citizens of Gorman, before the massacre takes place, sing the Gorman anthem, which is basically just a song about what it means to be a Gor. They are remembering their history right before they fight the Empire. In episode 12, while the band plays, there's a moment where the solemn, sad music they're playing turns into a more upbeat, rebellious tune as they march toward the Empire, sending them a message that they're ready to fight. In my previous analysis, I talked about a theme of hearing and listening that runs throughout this show. Music really connects to this, obviously. Whether it's the citizens of Ferrix banging on their metal pieces to send a message to everybody else that the Empire is here, or a guy banging on a metal drum with anvils. And music ties into this broader theme of Andor being a messenger and spreading the news and information about the Empire's tyranny. In episode 11, Melshi leaves Cassian, telling him that the people need to know about this. In that same episode, Luthen puts a gun to Saw's head and tells him, "I'm doing this so you'll listen." Marva sends a message from beyond the grave with her recorded hologram. Andor receives a message from his father Clem as he touches his funeral stone and remembers him. These are just a couple examples of this messenger theme in the final 2 episodes of Andor, and music is just one more evolution to this core theme. Speaking of the unity of music, let me talk about another new theme that comes up in these final episodes, which is rain. Here's something we hear Nemik say in his manifesto in episode 11.
The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many.
Flooded the banks of the Empire. That's what Nemik says. As we hear his words, rain falls outside of the ship Andor's staying in. In episode 11, Mon and Vel have a conversation about Mon's finances, and rain falls outside as they talk. In this conversation, Mon likens her money to water flowing downhill.
So easy. I did it myself. Set up a stream of accounts. It was like water running downhill. I'd empty the bottom and it would just flow.
We haven't seen rain yet at all so far in season 1, and in these final 2 episodes, we're getting references to flooding, water, and Nemik's words are broadcast in the middle of a downpour. I interpret this as rain being a metaphor for the rebellion. First there's a few drops, then a trickle, then a steady stream of drops falling. It reminds me how, before the Eye of Aldhani forms on the horizon, there's a few stray crystals that enter the atmosphere and burn up beforehand. Seeing how there's a full-blown uprising on Ferrix in episode 12, I'd say Nemik's words about these moments of defiance flooding the banks of the Empire, and the rain that pours while hearing him say that, are thematically significant, and put there for a reason. Finally, I have to pay off an overarching motif that I've talked about at length in my Andor analysis, and that's one of fire and heat, and the Rebels' association with it. There's a couple more noteworthy additions to this running theme in these episodes, like this close-up of B's eye right after he learns of Marva's death. It really looks like there's a burning sun behind the eye, doesn't it? Or the red cloak that covers Marva's body as she's carted away. Or the fact she's cremated and made into a brick. Or Willman soldering a bomb here at the start of episode 12 and throwing it at the Empire later, which knocks over a box of grenades and sparks a chain reaction of explosions. Or this shot of Brasso speaking with Zan, where sparks are flying in the background. Or this line of dialogue from Brasso to Andor, where he relays words from his mother.
Tell him none of this is his fault. It was already burning. He's just the first spark of the fire.
This ties back into multiple shots of Andor walking in front of Sparks on Ferrix in episode 2, and walking towards the camera as sparks fly in that same episode, suggesting Cassian is the spark of the rebellion. Not to mention the deep reds, oranges, and yellows of the band that plays for Marva's funeral. Also, in my Aldhani analysis, I talked about how the ISB, according to Partagaz, are healthcare providers, treating sickness and locating germs. This ties into something Marva says in her speech.
There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy.
Suggesting that the Empire is the real disease on the universe, not rebel activity. I've made over 90 minutes of concentrated analysis on Andor's first season alone, which goes to show just how much of a masterpiece it really is, and I can't wait to make videos breaking down Andor's second season over the coming weeks. What details did you notice in Andor Season 1? Let me know down below in the comments. If you like this analysis, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There'll be more Andor analysis videos coming like this in the future. For now, I'll see you next time.